The rain had been falling for hours, blurring the glass windows of the small apartment where James and Diep sat in silence. The sound of thunder outside mixed with the ticking of the old wall clock, each second heavy like the weight pressing on James's shoulders. He looked down at the stack of documents in front of him: unpaid bills, debt notices, and letters from investors withdrawing their support. Everything he had built, everything he had dreamed of, was crumbling right before his eyes. Diep stood quietly by the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she poured tea. She wanted to say something, anything to comfort him, but words felt useless against the storm that had entered their lives. For weeks, James hadn't slept. He spent nights staring at spreadsheets, trying to find a way to save his company. The once confident CEO now looked like a man fading under the weight of his failures. "I've failed everyone, Diep," James whispered finally, his voice breaking. "I promised to give you a better life. I promised my mother that I'd make her proud. And now, I can't even keep this business alive." Diep placed the cup of tea on the table and knelt beside him. Her eyes were soft, filled with a quiet strength. "You haven't failed," she said. "You're still fighting. That's what matters." James shook his head. "The company's gone. The investors have left. We don't even have enough to pay the rent next month. Maybe it's time to let it go." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, from the other side of the city, James's mother, Mrs. Hyen, sat alone by her window, looking at an old photograph of her son and his father. Her heart ached as she thought of how hard James was trying. She knew he wouldn't ask for help, he was too proud for that, but a mother's heart always knows when her child is in pain. That night, while the rain still whispered on the roof, Mrs. Hyen made a decision that would change everything. She walked to her desk, opened an old folder, and took out the title deed of the family home, the house that had kept their memories, their laughter, and even their grief. Her hands trembled as she looked at it one last time. "If this house can buy my son's hope," she whispered, "then it's worth it." She closed the folder, wiped her tears, and smiled through the ache in her chest. For her, love wasn't just about holding on, it was about letting go for the sake of someone else's tomorrow. Outside, the storm began to ease, and though James and Diep didn't yet know it, a mother's sacrifice had already begun to light the way for their new beginning. The next morning, the sun broke through the gray clouds, painting the city in soft golden light. It was the first clear day after weeks of rain, yet James's heart still felt heavy. He stood by the window, staring blankly outside as Diep quietly prepared breakfast. The smell of warm porridge filled the small kitchen, but neither of them had much appetite. James's phone buzzed, a message from his mother. "Come visit when you can. I have something important to tell you." The tone was calm, almost too calm, and that worried him. Mrs. Hyen rarely asked for anything. She was a woman who had endured years of hardship without complaint. He drove home that afternoon, the road feeling longer than usual. When he arrived, the front gate was slightly open. The familiar sight of the old house filled his chest with memories, the sound of his father's laughter echoing in the courtyard, the smell of his mother's jasmine tea, the afternoons he and Diep had spent sitting under the old banyan tree, dreaming of a better future. But now, something was different. The air felt final. "Mom," James called softly as he stepped inside. Mrs. Hyen appeared from the kitchen, her gentle smile not quite hiding the exhaustion in her eyes. "You came," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sit down, I made your favorite tea." He sat uneasy. "Mom, what's going on? You sounded serious in your message." She hesitated for a moment, then reached into a small drawer and handed him a thin envelope. "I sold the house, James." The words hit him like lightning. He froze. "What?" His voice cracked. What do you mean? Sold the house. This is our home." Tears welled in her eyes, but she stayed composed. "Homes can be rebuilt, my son. But dreams, when they die, they don't come back so easily. You have a vision, James. You and Diep. You just need a little help to start again." So I did what a mother must do. James's throat tightened. "You shouldn't have done that. I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. I don't deserve this." Mrs. Hyen reached over, her wrinkled hand covering his. "You are my son. Every mother's greatest wish is to see her child stand again after falling. This house, these walls, they're just bricks and wood. But you, James, you are my heart walking in this world." He looked down, unable to speak as tears blurred his vision. At that moment, Diep entered quietly with a small bag of groceries, unaware of what had just happened. When she saw James's trembling shoulders and Mrs. Hyen's tearful eyes, she instantly understood that something deep had shifted. Later that night, when James told her everything, Diep wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "Your mother's love is the greatest wealth we could ever have. We won't waste it. We'll build something beautiful from her sacrifice." Outside, the wind carried the faint scent of jasmine from the old garden. The house might soon belong to someone else, but the spirit of that home, the love that had lived within its walls, was now alive in their hearts. And for the first time in weeks, James smiled, not because things were easy, but because he finally understood. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what truly matters. The money from selling the house wasn't much compared to the fortune James once managed, but it carried something far more powerful: sacrifice and hope. Every dollar was soaked with the love of a mother who had given up her comfort so her son and his beloved could begin again. James and Diep rented a small office on the outskirts of the city. The walls were bare, the desks second-hand, and the chairs creaked every time someone moved, but the air was alive with purpose. For the first time in months, James felt like he could breathe again. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Diep asked one morning, looking over the piles of documents scattered across the desk. "It's going to be hard, James. We'll be starting from nothing." James smiled faintly. "No, Diep, we're starting from love, and that's something stronger than money." She didn't reply, only reached for his hand. That one touch, gentle but steady, was enough to remind them both of why they were here. They began small, helping local farmers sell their crops directly to consumers, using James's knowledge of supply chains and Diep's kindness to build trust. They called their little company Green Hope. Every transaction mattered, not just for profit, but for rebuilding faith in business, in people, in themselves. Days turned into nights filled with planning, phone calls, and mistakes. Sometimes James fell asleep at his desk, his head resting on piles of reports. Diep would cover him with a blanket, whispering softly, "You don't have to carry the world alone anymore." There were moments when failure seemed close again. Suppliers pulled out, partners hesitated, and old competitors tried to crush their return. James often found himself questioning everything. Had his mother's sacrifice been for nothing? But then he'd see Diep in the market, speaking kindly to a farmer, helping an old woman count her change, and something inside him would reignite. One evening, as they were closing up the office, Diep handed him a small brown box. "Open it," she said, her eyes gleaming. Inside was a simple framed photo, the three of them, James, Diep, and his mother, taken years ago in front of the house that no longer stood. Beneath it, Diep had written in neat handwriting, "Home is not a place. It's the people who never give up on you." James looked at her for a long moment, his heart full. "We'll make it, Diep," he whispered. "I don't know how long it'll take, but we will." She smiled, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I know we will, because this time, we're not chasing money, we're chasing meaning." As the city lights flickered in the distance, the small office glowed softly in the night, humble, fragile, yet burning with new life. They had lost a house, a fortune, and the life they once knew. But in return, they had found something the world couldn't buy: faith, resilience, and love that refused to break. And for James, that was the real beginning. Months passed, and Green Hope began to grow, slowly, quietly, but steadily. What started with a few farmers and small sales turned into contracts with local markets and eco-friendly brands. People began to notice their sincerity. The company's reputation spread, not through flashy ads or big investments, but through trust and word of mouth. James often stood by the window of their tiny office, looking out at the busy street below. He wasn't wearing expensive suits anymore, and his hands were rough from working long hours. But there was a peace in his eyes that no amount of luxury could ever bring. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, James received a phone call. His mother's voice came through, tired but full of warmth. "Son, how are you?" James smiled. "Mom, we made it." There was silence on the other end, then a soft sound of quiet crying. "I knew you would," she whispered. "I never doubted you, James. You just needed to lose everything to find what truly matters." The next weekend, James and Diep returned to visit her. The house was gone, replaced by an empty lot covered in wildflowers. His mother stood beside it, holding a pot of tea. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but pride. Diep handed her a small envelope. Inside was the deed to a new home, modest but warm. "This is for you," Diep said softly. "You gave us a future. Now it's our turn." His mother looked from Diep to James, her hands trembling. "You'd have built this from nothing." James nodded, eyes glistening. "Not from nothing, Mom. From your love." They stood together, the three of them, as the evening wind swept across the field. It was not the life they once dreamed of, no luxury cars, no grand mansion, but it was real. It was earned, and it was theirs. That night, sitting on the porch of their new home, James whispered to Diep, "Do you remember when everyone said we were done?" Diep leaned her head on his shoulder. "Yes, but love doesn't end, James. It rebuilds." He smiled, gazing at the stars. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a fallen businessman. He felt like a man who had finally come home. Because in the end, the greatest success wasn't in rebuilding a company, but in rebuilding their lives together with love, faith, and the woman who had never stopped believing in him. Life has a strange way of teaching people what truly matters. Sometimes we must lose everything we thought we needed to realize what we already have is enough. The story of James Diep and James's mother is not about wealth or business success. It is about love, sacrifice, and the quiet strength that comes from believing in one another. When James's mother sold her house, it wasn't because she had given up on her own life. It was because she saw something greater, a future where her son could rebuild not just his company, but his soul. To her, a home wasn't walls or a roof. It was where love lived, and love would always return. Her sacrifice became the foundation on which James and Diep built everything anew. James, who once measured success by profit and prestige, learned that failure was not the end, but a doorway to humility and growth. Losing his fortune stripped away his pride, but it also allowed him to see the beauty in simplicity. The way Diep smiled when he came home tired. The way his mother brewed tea every morning as if nothing in the world was wrong. Those small, tender moments became his new wealth. Diep, on the other hand, showed that love isn't about comfort or luxury. It is about standing beside someone when the world walks away. Her quiet determination, her hands working tirelessly beside his, gave James something money could never buy: purpose. She didn't save him with grand gestures. She saved him by believing in him when no one else did. Together, they discovered that the value of life isn't in what you own, but in who you have. The house that was once sold became a symbol of rebirth, proof that sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what's truly priceless. In the end, their story reminds us that success is not measured by the size of a company or the number of digits in a bank account. It's measured by how much love you can give, how many times you can rise after falling, and how deeply you can be grateful for the people who stay when everything else fades away. True wealth is not built in skyscrapers or boardrooms. It's built in hearts that choose love over fear, sacrifice over comfort, and hope over despair. Because when all else is gone, and even the last door seems closed, love will always open a new one, just as it did for James, Diep, and the woman who gave everything so they could have a future worth living for.